A horror story that should never be told. Lucien Dubois never should have come here. He knew that the moment he stepped into the Carpathian woods, where the air felt too thick, the silence too heavy, and the trees bent as if whispering to one another. For months, he had been researching the vanished village of Saint-Mirabel, a place erased from history, with no official records, no maps, and no survivors. Yet every decade, someone vanished near its supposed location, and every decade no bodies were ever found. Lucien wasn't a fool. He had investigated his share of urban legends. He didn't believe in curses, but this time, the whispers had called him by name. By the time Lucien found the village, dusk had fallen. The settlement was still standing, its wooden homes intact, its cobblestone streets untouched by time. But something was wrong. None of the houses had windows. Their doors were nailed shut with iron spikes, the wood scarred with deep claw marks, as if something had tried to break in or out. The village felt unreal, like a painting that had been abandoned before the artist could finish. And then Lucien saw the figures. People, standing in the doorways. They did not move, did not breathe, but he could feel them watching. Lucien should have left, but the human mind, in its arrogance, often believes it can rationalize fear. So when he saw the slightly open door of a nearby house, he stepped inside. The room was frozen in time. A table set for dinner, chairs still pulled back, dust untouched for what seemed like centuries. Then came the sound of breathing. Lucien turned sharply. A mirror stood in the corner, its surface blackened as if scorched. And in that mirror, something stood behind him. Not a person, not even a shape, just the suggestion of a figure, a presence that should not have been there. Lucien's own reflection began to change. His eyes blackened, his mouth stitched shut, his skin stretching too tight over his skull. The door slammed shut behind him. The whispering grew louder. Lucien ran, out of the house, down the endless, shifting streets. And then, he reached the village square. A well stood at its center, its mouth yawning open, a void of blackness that seemed to breathe. Beside it was a statue, a woman, her face erased, her hands raised as if in prayer, and beneath her feet, a carved inscription, "We are empty." Lucien's stomach twisted. Then, behind him, the villagers arrived. They filled the square, pale and lifeless, their mouths sewn shut with black thread, their heads tilted in unison, and then, in a voice that did not belong to them, "Join us!" Lucien bolted, but the village had changed. The path back to the forest was gone. In its place, only more houses, stretching forever into the fog. The villagers did not follow. Instead, one by one they began to climb into the well. Lucien watched, paralyzed, as their limbs cracked and folded, their heads jerking at unnatural angles, bodies vanishing into the hungry blackness, until only one remained, a child. Its eyes were hollow sockets, wet and empty. It raised a trembling, rotting hand, pointed at him, and whispered, "You were never meant to leave." Lucien's mind fractured. He turned, desperate, and grabbed onto the statue for support. And that's when he saw it. A second name, carved into the stone. L. Dubois, Lucien's own name. His breath came in short, jagged gasps. This wasn't the first time he had come here. He had been here before, and he had never left. A noise, a sick, wet whisper rising from the well. Lucien turned, horror clawing up his throat. A hand, his own hand, reached from the darkness below, gripping his ankle, pulling him down, and as he fell he realized he had always belonged to the Hollow Ones. The next morning, authorities found Lucien's abandoned car at the edge of the forest. The village of Saint-Mirabel did not exist. His body was never found. But in the deep woods, hidden beneath the roots of time, a new statue stood in the village square. And beneath it, freshly carved into the stone, L. Dubois. We are empty. Some places do not want to be remembered. Some souls do not want to be found.